Little shot of my campsite here. I'm staying at number 48 at Mew Lake. That first shot was just a lucky one. Little chickadee came along there, or whatever he was. I left some peanuts out here this morning, and I left a bag out here, and it went away. Found my first little pile gone. Found the bag missing, and I said, oh, somebody swiped my bag. I found it over by the campfire. It was all kind of dirty. And red squirrel went and chewed a hole right through it. But it looks like he tried to chew a hole through the tie there first, trying to get it off. Anyway, it looks like my coffee is just about ready.
The magnificent cow and bull moose you see here are typical of most of the specimens displayed in the visitor center. Both were lucky acquisitions, and neither required our going out to deliberately collect the animals. The bull was killed in a nighttime collision with a van on Highway 60 in December 1991, and the cow was found dead, from unknown causes, in Lake of Two Rivers in August 1992. If you would like to learn about the spectacular mating season of moose, please press 1. If you would like to know more about Algonquin's moose population and how we go about estimating its size, please press 2. If you would like to know about one of the most serious enemies of moose in Algonquin Park, please press 3. The moose in this display are portrayed at the height of the late September mating season, or rut. The bull's antlers, which grew from April to early September, measure almost 1 meter from tip to tip and weigh 25 kilograms, or about 60 pounds. They are used to dominate rival bulls and to impress cows. You will notice that a small balsam fir has been seriously damaged by the bull thrashing his antlers, and close to the rail you will see a rut pit. This was dug up by the bull, who then urinated in the pit and wallowed in the resulting puddle to make himself more sexually attractive. Listen also for the deep, resonant grunts of the bull, signifying his sexual excitement, and the drawn-out nasal bawls from the cow. She is fast approaching her receptive period, when she will allow the bull to mate with her and to fertilize the eggs that will give rise to 1 or 2 moose calves 7.5 this coming May. Although over 1,000 moose are born in Algonquin Park each year, about the same number have to die, of course, if the population is going to remain stable. One of the things that causes moose to die is the brainworm, which you can see on the preserved moose brain at the bottom of the text panel behind you on the other side of the walkway railing. If you would like to know more about Algonquin's moose population and how we go about estimating it, please press 2. If you would like to learn about another serious enemy of Algonquin Park moose, the winter tick, please press 3. Many visitors to Algonquin ask how many moose there are in the park, and most people assume we would always have a precise, up-to-date count of the Algonquin moose population. Well, moose may be big, but even from the air in winter, they can be surprisingly hard to see in thickly forested country like the park. There is simply no possibility of going out and counting all the moose in Algonquin, even under the most favorable conditions. And even if we could, the number we can soon be out of date as new calves are born and older animals succumb to accidents, disease, or predators. With these problems in mind, the best we can ever do is provide an estimate of the park's moose population. We do this by conducting aerial surveys in winter of randomly selected plots, 35 on the west side of the park and 23 on the east side. Each plot is 10 kilometers long by 2.5 kilometers wide, and it takes 4 or 5 passes with the aircraft, flying about 120 meters above the ground, to cover each one. The surveys must be flown on sunny days so as to make moose tracks visible from the air, and between 18 and 72 hours after snowfall, so that enough time has elapsed for new tracks to have been made, but not so much time that there will be too many tracks to sort out. When we find tracks, we follow them in the aircraft up to the animals, whose numbers, sex, and estimated age we then record before resuming the search. Because the plots account for less than 20% of the park's total area, we do not actually find and count all the moose in the park. Instead, we have to estimate the park population based on what we have found on the plots, and in doing so, we have to allow for possible errors. Errors such as failing to find all the moose on the plots, and the possibility that the plots may not be exactly representative of the park as a whole. Taking these limitations into account, we were 90% sure in the winter of 1992-93, for example, that Algonquin's moose population was between 4,000 and 4,900 animals. This may appear ridiculously vague, but to come up with a more precise statement would require a truly enormous and prohibitively expensive effort that would be quite beyond our means, and doomed to be soon out of date in any case. In fact, our estimated figures are not so useless as they might appear. For one thing, they do give a general idea of the moose population, and by repeating our surveys from time to time under similar conditions, we may be able to detect trends. In this way, for example, we feel confident that our Algonquin moose population greatly increased between 1975 and 1983, and has basically remained very high ever since then. Of course, every year brings new conditions that can affect the fortunes of park animals in different ways, so there is no guarantee that Algonquin's moose population will always remain high. If you haven't already done so, and you would like to learn about the spectacular mating season of moose, here we are looking at an Algonquin spruce bog in the month of August. The display contains many of the most typical bog plants and animals, but it also has something special. A pack of wolves at one of their late summer rendezvous sites. 2 adults and 2 pups are looking excitedly off to the right as 2 other adults return to the pack, and if you press the button, you can hear them howl. To learn something about the ecology of wolves in Algonquin Park, please press 1. To find out about their social behavior and the significance of howling, please press 2. Or to learn about the life of the pitcher plant, one of the park's carnivorous bog plants, please press 3. One of the pups in this display has just looked up from gnawing on an old white-tailed deer bone, and this gives us a good indication of what wolves feed on here in the park. Indeed, the wolves of Algonquin seem to be a distinctly small race, with males averaging about 28 kilograms, or 61 pounds, and females weighing in at only 24.5 kilograms, or 54 pounds. This small size apparently puts our local wolves at too much of a disadvantage when attacking moose, that may easily weigh 20 times as much as a typical Algonquin wolf. This leaves deer as the main suitable prey for park wolves, and indeed deer are prominent in their diet all year round. In the winter, deer are often the only prey taken for months at a time. The wolf pack on the hunt travels ceaselessly, especially along conifer-lined lakeshores where the footing is often better and deer are likely to be encountered. Every deer found is likely to be chased, and the wolves either catch up with it quite quickly or realize that the deer is getting away and that further pursuit is futile. Sometimes a healthy deer will slip and fall, allowing the wolves to catch up, but generally speaking, the deer that get caught tend to be the individuals that can't run very fast, the very young ones, or the old, sick, or injured. Wolves continue to feed on deer in the summertime, especially on fawns, which have almost no chance of outrunning a wolf. Algonquin wolves also hunt around beaver ponds in the summer and fall, and often succeed in catching beavers when they come out on land to get food. At times, beavers have accounted for as much as 80% of the summer food of our wolves. There is no doubt that wolves are the top predator in the Algonquin Park ecosystem, but that doesn't mean that they can go out and catch a deer or a beaver whenever they want. On the contrary, all the evidence suggests that wolves have to work very hard to find and catch prey. Sometimes they starve to death, and this seems to be the way that wolf numbers are regulated, and what keeps them from increasing to astronomical levels within a very few years. In the 7,600 square kilometers of Algonquin Park, for example, we think that there are about 30 wolf packs. At the end of the winter, each one might consist of 5 individual animals for a total park population of about 150 wolves. This figure will approximately double when the pups are born in May, with the top-ranking female in each pack having a litter of about 5 pups. When that happens, the park wolf population has suddenly gone up to about 300 animals. But by the end of the following winter, the population will be back down to 150. Algonquin's deer, moose, and beaver populations just don't supply enough catchable individuals to sustain a population of 300 wolves for very long, and the extra wolves are doomed to starve. Most of the individual animals that die are the pups born earlier that year. When they start traveling with the pack in the fall and have to compete with older, stronger pack members for a place around their kills, or have to leave the pack to find a territory or food of their own, most of them are not dominant, skilled, or lucky enough to keep themselves sufficiently well fed. Thus, the 2 pups we see in this display, although prospering now under the care of their parents and other pack members, are almost certainly doomed to die in the coming months. The so-called balance and harmony of nature are achieved only as the result of early and widespread death, mostly of young animals who fail to reach their first birthday. If you would like to see just how short are the average lifespans of wolves and other animals and plants shown in this display, lift the cover on the panel to your left, or you can play Spruce Bog Roulette at the computer terminal just behind you. If you would like to learn about the social behavior of wolves and the significance of howling, please press 2. Or, if you would like to learn about the life of the pitcher plants shown in this display, please press 3. If you have pressed the button to the right of this display and heard a sample of wolf howls, or if, better still, you have heard the real thing either on your own or with 1,000 or so other people on one of our August public wolf howling expeditions, I am sure you will agree that there are few more beautiful or stirring sounds in the wilderness. And yet, we can be sure that wolves do not vocalize to entertain human beings. So just why do they howl? On one level, it is easy to see why howling might be useful. After all, here is an animal that lives in a closely knit social unit, the pack, but often hunts at night in thickly forested country where direct visual contact between separated, highly mobile pack members is usually quite impossible. Under such circumstances, it only makes sense that wolves might evolve some far-reaching means, like howling, to communicate with each other. Howling does indeed permit pack members to keep track of each other's locations, and it also seems to cement their social relations. For example, at sunset on a summer evening, just before the adults leave the pups to go off hunting, the entire pack often comes together with much nuzzling, tail wagging, and most important of all, a long, spontaneous group howl. The yipping and yapping of the pups mingles with the drawn-out, mournful howls of the adults, and the chorus may serve to strengthen the acceptance of each individual wolf as a member of the pack. Howling also has a much more serious communication function, namely as a warning to other wolves not to approach. Particularly when a pack has something worth defending, such as a fresh kill or a litter of pups, it will respond to the howl of a strange wolf with howls of its own. These communicate their intention to fight with and kill a stranger if it comes any closer. On the other hand, especially if they are trespassing on a neighboring territory or have nothing worth defending, wolves may not respond at all to the howl of a stranger and may instead quickly leave the area without betraying their presence through howling. This is especially likely if the howl they hear is deep and gruff. Deep howls are made by big chest cavities, and big chest cavities are possessed by wolves that are to be feared much more than smaller animals with higher-pitched howls. Wolves are apparently capable of sizing up the potential danger posed by a strange wolf they hear howling, and then they decide whether or not to reply themselves and actually get into a confrontation. By the same token, Low-status wolves, who are already used to being dominated in their own pack, are much less likely to howl back than is the pack's dominant, or alpha male. Sometimes when you get a tumultuous answer from a wolf pack, beautiful starry night in Algonquin Park, a few minutes may pass, and then you hear something walking in the forest close to your campfire. The alpha male come to attack what he thought was a strange wolf trespassing on his territory. When he realizes it was only humans, he will go back into the night to rejoin his pack, leaving you with the incomparable experience of having heard and almost met a pack of wild Algonquin wolves. If you would like to learn about the ecology of wolves in Algonquin, at the lower left of this display, growing in the sphagnum moss, you can see two pitcher plants. Take a close look at its leaves. Each one is shaped for all the world like a slender pitcher, open at the top and complete with a pouring spout. These leaves usually contain a mixture of rainwater and juices secreted by the plant itself, and they actually function as traps for hapless insects. The victims are attracted to the traps by sweet-smelling nectar and possibly by the purplish-red veins and blotches that you can see in many of the leaves. If an insect lands on the pitcher's pouring spout, it encounters stiff, downward-pointing hairs, and then, below that, a slippery, waxy area. The insect may well lose its footing and tumble down into the liquid below. There it drowns and is digested by enzymes released into the deadly pool by the pitcher's walls. What a marvelous way for the pitcher plant to get around a major ecological problem presented by life in a bog. After all, bog plants do not grow in mineral soil the way most plants do, but on peat, the semi-decayed remains of previous plant generations. Such soil is desperately poor in minerals, substances such as the potassium, calcium, and especially nitrogen that all plants, and us animals too, need to make vital body chemicals, particularly proteins. Instead of trying to extract almost non-existent nitrogen and other minerals from the peat soil of a bog, pitcher plants tap into the much richer supply contained in insects. The pitcher plant has such a good thing going, in fact, that perhaps not surprisingly, other organisms get into the act. Flesh fly maggots and midge larvae live in the pitcher plant leaves and eat parts of the dead insects before the pitcher plant can completely break them down and absorb them. Needless to say, bacteria also flourish in the nutrient-rich soup contained in the leaf, and they are eaten by microscopic one-celled animals. These animals in turn are swept up and eaten by the brush-like arms of a very special insect. The pitcher plant mosquito is a species whose larvae are not only immune to the digestive enzymes in which they swim, but in fact are never found anywhere else. When you stop and think about it, the little pools contained within pitcher plant leaves are a great place for a mosquito larva to develop. Food, based on the constant inflow of trapped insects, is plentiful, and there are no fish to worry about either. The enclosing leaf even performs a sort of aquarium maintenance service. Being an otherwise normal green leaf, it produces oxygen, some of which is released into the liquid and becomes available to sustain the lives of the mosquito larvae. Of course, as the mosquito larvae consume oxygen, they produce carbon dioxide and also nitrogen-rich ammonia. But both these chemicals are useful to the pitcher plant and are gradually absorbed by the pitcher walls. Thus, rather than being poisoned by the lack of oxygen or the accumulation of waste products, the liquid within a pitcher plant leaf continues to have stable conditions that benefit both the plant itself and the animals living there. Who would have thought that a whole little world could exist in the leaves of this one remarkable plant of our Algonquin spruce bogs? If you would...
Hello, my name is Joyce Ayres, and with the help of the Golden Lake Algonquin peoples, we have designed this exhibit before you. The display depicts a family group, in this case, a man, a woman, and grandfather at a fall campsite near a lake trout spawning bed. They have just come up from the Ottawa River where they spent the summer, and now Having arrived on traditional family hunting territory, they are busy catching and smoking fish as one of the most important foods for the long, cold winter which will soon be upon them. If you would like to hear my husband tell you about birch bark canoes, please press 1. The woman is tending a cut on her foot. If you would like to know how she dresses the wound, please press 3. If you wish to hear the story on the foodstuffs she would gather on this fishing trip, please press 2.
Hello, I'm the young man kneeling in front of the canoe. As you look around our campsite, you will notice that we use birch bark for many things. The birch tree is very important to us. It gives us medicine, bark, wood for our fires, bowls, baskets, almost everything. And most importantly, it gives us the birch bark canoe. The canoe you see behind me was made in the late 1800s by Tom Sarazan of Golden Lake. For this exhibit, it was repaired by his great-nephew, Stanley Sarazan. As you can see, the birch bark canoe is built using only materials found in the forest. Once you have harvested your bark, it must be rolled out flat and weighed down with large stones. You also need to be by water in order to soak your wood and have lots of boiling water to pour over your bark to help flatten it and make it supple. Once it is rolled out flat with the help of stones and water, cedar is split into very narrow long pieces. The shape of the canoe is made using cedar, lashed together with bark and spruce root. This form of the canoe is then laid on the bark. The bark is pulled up and held in place by stakes driven into the ground. More bark is added up the sides and sewn into place with spruce root, using the bone awl like the one in the display case next to you. All those holes and lace the bark together. But once this is done, the canoe form is then removed. You have to harvest hundreds of feet of spruce root for your canoe. My grandfather taught me not to take too much from one place. The ribs are made of cedar. Once split and soaked in water, they become very pliable and can be bent into the right shape. But before they are put in, the entire inside of the canoe is lined with split cedar. The ribs are then added and hold the cedar in place. The canoe rigidity and also strength. It will now take some bumps and drops without splitting the bark. Now for the spruce gum. We take baskets and go for long walks and collect big deposits of spruce gum found on the outside of spruce trees. We place this gum in hide bags and boil it till all the gum rises to the top and then skimmed off. The gum is then placed in cold water and becomes much like taffy. You must pull it and twist it till it becomes the color of honey. It is then boiled again and animal tallow is added. Just the right amount to keep the gum pliable so that it doesn't crack in the cold water, yet stiff enough not to soften in the summer heat, or you would have a leaky canoe. It is applied by a frayed piece of ash branch. Wood ash is mixed in. This helps to see where the canoe is leaking. It also attracts sunlight, and this helps keep the gum and seams flexible throughout the summer. On this fishing trip, we are using the canoe for a shelter to sleep under. If you want to learn more about other uses of birch bark, please press 1. If you would like to learn about food gathering from my wife, please press 2. If you would like to learn about the herbs and medicines we use, please press 3. The first thing we must do before making birch bark containers is to collect the bark. When I look for birch bark, I want bark that is clean and free of the black scars of knots and twigs, as these will appear as eyes when you remove the bark from the tree. You will find the cleanest bark above the average winter snow line. Below the snow line, the bark will be rough and shaggy. There are good times in the year to collect the bark, and if you do it right, you can take the bark from the tree without killing it. I harvest bark in the late spring and no later than June. I find that the bark almost peels itself from the tree. When you cut the bark from the tree, you will notice that it always peels opposite to how it is on the tree. Remember this when you are making things from bark. Now that you have your bark, you can make anything: baskets, bowls, pouches, cradle boards, and if you know how to cut them, those big scars or eyes on the bark can be trimmed and you can fashion a birch bark spoon. We wrap food in it to bake it. We also store food in it. An example of this is a stack of birch bark pieces with the smoked fish fillets between each layer sitting beside the fire. This helps stop the spread of food spoilage if one of the fillets goes rotten. The other thing you will need when you make bark baskets is some kind of good cord. There are many things to make cord from: cedar root, milkweed stem, and spruce root. Just remember not to take all the plants and roots from the same area. It is best to work with everything green and damp. Keep your bark in the shade or covered and keep your cording wet. When you complete your basket or container, it will dry almost waterproof. As everything dries, it shrinks, and all your lace holes will close up. Of course, you can always seal your seams the same way we do on canoes. If you would like to learn about food gathering from my wife, please press 2. If you would like to learn about the herbs and medicines we use, please press 3.
Fall is a good time for the people. There is so much food. No one goes hungry in the fall. My grandfather is smoking fish over there when he's not playing with the whiskey jock. When the fish are caught, we put them in the shade, as fish sunburn very easily. Once the fish, we will string them on poles and hang them for a day or until they don't feel slimy anymore. Hanging the fish tenderizes the meat. Now you start to smoke it. Too much heat and it cooks the fish, and everyone has a feast. You need just enough heat to draw the moisture out of the fish without really cooking the flesh. Once it is smoked to this stage, it is taken down and wiped off with some leaves. Never water. Then the fish is filleted. These fillets have to be nice and thin so they smoke completely and they don't sour. We will store the smoked fish in bark containers. We smoke or dry all our foodstuffs for the winter months. If the winter is good, we will have lots of fresh moose meat or deer. But I have seen some winters when the people have gone hungry, and many people have died. Most of our food is boiled or roasted using bark containers and hot rocks. The rocks are heated until they're red hot and then placed into the bark containers. 5 or 6 good hot rocks will boil a basket full of water. If you are going to try this, make the rocks no bigger than your fist and don't collect rocks from near the water. Any fieldstone would be good. Roasting was done by digging a pit to fit the meat you wish to bake. It was then lined with hot rocks. When the hot rocks were in place, then a thin layer of soil is put on them for insulation. Then cover the soil with a layer of green growth. Skunk cabbage was used, cedar, moss, ferns also. If the animal was small, like a rabbit or beaver, it would then be wrapped in clean birch bark to seal in the juices. Tubers and herbs and berries would be added to the cavity. The whole thing buried and a fire built on top. The top fire would definitely be needed if you were cooking a large piece, but a rabbit would probably just cook from the stones itself. There are many bulbs and tubers to gather at this time of year. There's plenty of wild onion. You can eat the leaves and the roots. Roasted in the ashes are my favorite way to eat them. Sweet flag root is best just picked and eaten. In the spring, young bulrush stalks are a delicacy we all wait for. And in the cow parsnip, it is the inner part of the growing stalk that is preferred. It is often eaten fresh, but if you have a fire going, gently roast the stalk before peeling it. There are also many berries, and these are easily dried and they are added to just about everything. Gathering food was hard work, but every minute of it was enjoyable to the people. All our elders smile when they remember expeditions to the berry patches and the root crop area. Young and old, man and woman, boy or girl, everyone who could walk or who was small enough to be carried in a cradle board, joined in the food gathering. would like to hear my husband tell you about birch bark canoes, please press 1. The woman is tending a cut on her foot. If you would like to know how she dresses the wound, please press 3. I have cut my foot on a sharp rock by the water's edge. I made some cedar tea to wash the cut with. Cedar water is good for many things. Sleeping on cedar boughs keeps the insects away from the furs and hides. If you cut yourself in your camping, boil some cedar tips in water and wash the wound. This is what I'm doing now. I will use the bulrush fluff and some clean moss as a bandage. I will fasten it to my foot by a piece of wet deerskin, and I will lash it on with a wet lace. Then I will sit on this rock in the October sun and watch my grandfather smoke the fish and let the deerskin dry. It will harden into a very stiff bandage. If the cut was deep, I would have found some cobwebs to pull the wound together and covered it with comfrey leaves. But I'm lucky this time. The cut will not stop me from gathering the supply of herbs and medicine I'll need. I must collect lots of bulrush fluff and clean moss this year, as I'll need these for my baby's cradle board. I will have my baby in the early spring. The moss is stuffed between the baby's legs and down into the bottom of the cradle. The bulrush fluff is absorbent, and the moss draws the moisture away. Now that grandfather is living in our lodge, I will need chest medicine for him. Mullein and comfrey are very good. Coltsfoot also. He smokes that in his pipe when his chest hurts. The juniper berries are ready now, and they are good with all kinds of meat and fish. You can pound them dry into smoked fish and dried moose meat. One of the grandmothers needs some pine bark. She can make a medicine that takes away the coughing of the young ones in the winter. The broad leaves of the plantain is also needed. In the winter we work on our bone awls and knives, and someone always gets a bone splinter, and the wet plantain leaf usually draws it out overnight. Oh, there'll be lots of bumps and scrapes and burns to keep the medicine people busy all winter. In the display case you will notice medicine bundles. The language of the Algonquin people, as well as most indigenous cultures, is oral. This is not a written language. The series of knots and strings around each bundle is different. These codes were passed on from generation to generation. For example, comfrey was always tied with 3 knots and 2 strings, or whatever the combination was. This also facilitated not getting the wrong medicine in the dark. Winter is also the time for storytelling. This is the best medicine for the people. You only tell stories after the snow falls. Then the time is right for storytelling. And if you're really good at telling a story and the people are listening, great things can happen to you when you hear a story. If you are young, there are many lessons that people have learnt and they want to share with you. And maybe you'll pick an easier path. Just maybe. If you are in the fast step, it's always nice to know someone on the same path as you are, and you don't feel so alone. That's good medicine. Good story as fish. I have cut my foot on a sharp.
One time, Westgate Jock, where he was living with his grandmother at the time, and it was very cold. There was no fire on the earth, except the fire people. They're the ones who had fire. So his grandmother was getting cold during the winter, so he said, well, it was coming spring and she was getting chilled, and he said, I know, I'm going to look for those fire people. I'll get some fire for you to keep you warm. So he went there, and when he got there, the fire people were having a dance, a big powwow. And they were dancing around, and so he sneaked in, and he stole some fire. And he started to run with it, but one of the dancers saw him and said, Wissahickok was here. He stole our fire. So they started to chase him. And he didn't know what to do with this fire, and he knew they were going to catch up to him. So he saw a squirrel. He threw it at the squirrel, and it hit him on the tail, and just went, and it curved his tail, burnt it right through. That's why that squirrel has that curvy tail now. And he picked up the fire, the squirrel couldn't hold it, and he was running along. He saw a chipmunk. He threw it and he hit it on the head, and it went right down his back. That's why that chipmunk now has that stripe down his back. They couldn't hold it. So it was running along, and just in the spring and there was little hunks of ice here and there in the water, but there was a frog sitting there on a lily pad with a great big curvy tail on. So he threw it at the frog, and it just went and it burnt the tail right off that frog. That's why the frog has no tail now. He picked up the fire again and he ran, and those people were just about catching him. He didn't know what to do with it, so he threw it at the trees, and the tree swallowed it. That's why, up to this day, all you have to do is get two sticks and rub them together, and you can make fire, because all the trees have fire.
Yes, I would have to say that storytelling is the best medicine we have. If you would like to hear my husband...
Here is Emil the Lumberjack.
My name is Emil Tilliers. Back in the 1860s, I was a logger in what you now call Algonquin Park. Most of the shanties I lived in were about 40 feet square. The walls were made of large pine logs, usually 6 high, and was stuffed with moss on the inside and plastered with mud on the outside. No windows were required because huge fires supplied all the light in the city. The bunks were built of poles, and the cost of the lot would be about $300. For the crew would often put up a shanty in the space of 3 days. It took a lot of wood to heat one of those shanties, and when the fire got low during the cold winter night, the large opening in the roof let in the cold, and the crew sometimes were half-frozen to death. The cookery outfit of a Caribou shanty in those early days consisted of half a dozen baked kettles for baking bread, and one for making beans in the ashes. Often, in taking up the dishes, a few pounds of ashes or sand would get into the beans, but a good cook claimed that the ashes stayed pepper and helped digestion. The food consisted of bread, pork, and beans, and we could have tea if we paid $1 a month for it. One blanket was allotted to each man, and 2 men usually slept together. We turned in with all our clothes on, socks as well. Most of us would never change our underclothes or shirts until the clothes were worn out. And as to washing our feet, such a thing never came into our minds. For the old heads among us knew our feet would get washed often enough in the spring when the river driving commenced, wading in all that cold water with the rapids often up to our waists, sometimes our shoulders. This would soon wash all the dirt off our feet. The hours per day we worked in the bush or on the river all depended on how little sleep the 4 men could worry along with. It was a common occurrence for us to walk 3 or 4 miles from the bush to our work and then have to build a fire to keep from freezing until daylight came, so that we could see to work. It was strictly against the rules to come to the shanty before dark. On a spring log drive, the first work to be done was to rake all the winter log dumps and get the timber afloat. When the stock logs were taken out of the dam, floods sent the logs tumbling over the rapids. When they got jammed, the best man, jam crackers, or whitewater men as we call them, went to pick up the key log or a stick that was holding the rest. Often, the key log had to be cut with an axe, and probably when half cut through the pressure of the mass of logs behind, it cracked the stick, and in a second, the whole was a seething, twisting, curling mass of logs, bending and turning in every shape and going at terrific speed. It was in such places where a river driver had to spring as quickly as a squirrel in picking his way over the swiftly moving mass, often jumping 10 or 15 feet from one moving stick or log to another. Often, men got caught there, struck by a log, badly injured, or thrown into the madly foaming rapids with his comrades, utterly helpless to save him. I may say I got to like the life very much. The time went by very swiftly, and I'll always remember one Christmas day when we made out a fairly good feast in the front quarter of an old ox that had fallen over a rock and broke one of its legs. He was rather tough, but hey, we bore no ill will to the old ox on that account. The only visitors we had were a couple of French priests. who made it their duty to go regularly every winter to the lumber shanties. Often, the journeys were attended by many dangers, privations, and difficulties. But nothing ever stopped the good fathers. Snow, cold, or rain, they went all the same and were always joyfully received by both Catholics and Protestants alike. But I don't imagine you modern city folks can understand very much of all this. So, why don't you get on down to the Logging Museum near the East Gate? They'll show you a whole lot more about what a logger's life was really like back in Isles. And even nowadays as well.
Welcome to a typical Algonquin Park hardwood forest in the month of June. This habitat is dominated by the tree whose leaf appears on the Canadian flag, the sugar maple. This tree is so well adapted to growing on the soils left by the glacier on the park's western uplands that it often accounts for over 90% of the trees present. The sugar maple has a far-reaching influence over other living things in the forest. The yellow birch, for example, is another tree that grows here, but it is relatively scarce because the roots of its tiny seedlings cannot penetrate the thick layer of dead sugar maple leaves on the forest floor. This particular yellow birch got established only because the original seed happened to land on the exposed, rotting stump of a white pine taken by loggers many years ago. While they are still on the trees, the leaves of the sugar maple exert an even bigger influence. The summer shade they cast is so complete that growth of green plants is severely limited. In fact, some summer wildflowers of the hardwood forest don't even have the green chlorophyll that normally permits plants to capture the energy of sunlight and make food for themselves. This ghostly white Indian pipe, for example, couldn't use the energy of sunlight even if it were available, and gets around the sugar maple shade problem by drawing nourishment from a soil fungus that in turn gets its energy from the roots of nearby living trees. Many other plants and animals make their living in Algonquin's hardwood forests, but only if they can find a place in the basic forest structure imposed by the sugar maple. We'll see and listen to a few of them now. Try to spot the source of each sound before we identify it. The ovenbird is a warbler that spends most of its time on the forest floor, scratching about in the layer of dead sugar maple leaves looking for insects and spiders. The ruffed grouse also lives on the forest floor, but ventures upwards as well, looking for buds, blossoms, seeds, and fruit. The eastern chipmunk is another vegetarian based on the forest floor. It takes food similar to that of the grouse, but can also tackle more difficult food, such as the nuts of the beaked hazel, a shrub that grows in sunlit openings where a sugar maple has fallen and left a hole in the canopy. The white-tailed deer feeds on leaves and twigs. The supply of such food at the levels where deer can reach is limited by the amount of sunlight that reaches down to the forest floor. A mature shady forest is therefore a poor place for deer, and a disturbed, more open forest is much better. The red-eyed vireo, perhaps the park's most common bird, makes its living gleaning insects from the canopy foliage. The pileated woodpecker specializes on carpenter ants and can dig deep into dying trees to get them. The least flycatcher takes advantage of another rich source of food in the hardwood forest. Sitting quietly on shaded perches, it sallies forth from time to time to snap up flying insects. The redstart is a warbler that has adopted a fly-catching style of life very similar to that of the least flycatcher, but tends to dominate in sunnier, more open areas. The deer mouse is often the most abundant mammal in Algonquin Park, but its numbers are closely tied to the supplies of its chief food, the seeds of the sugar maple. In years following a big maple seed crop, deer mouse numbers may reach hundreds per hectare. Following a bad year, they may dwindle to almost none. The common owl of the hardwoods is the barred owl. Its main food is the deer mouse. But since mouse numbers are tied to maple seed production, the fortunes of even a meat eater like it are ultimately dependent on the sugar maple, the tree that controls just about all life in the hardwood forests of Algonquin Park.
Boy, am I ever glad we made it to the shelter hut before it got too dark.
Yeah. Besides, it's snowing and blowing pretty good now. If we'd been much later, we would have had to spend the night in the bush.
I can't believe we made it all the way up Opionga to the end of these darn years, especially pulling those loaded sleighs. Are you sure they weighed only 250 pounds?
That's all. And mark my words, by the time May comes round and we're counting the days before the ice goes out and we can paddle back to headquarters, you'll be wishing we brought in a lot more grub on this fine January day.
I guess you're right. Now, what about those tracks we saw coming out of Annie Bay? You think we should change our plans tomorrow and try to catch up with whoever made them?
Oh, I think I know who made them. That was little Ben Sawyer and Norm Linton from Madawaska, in on one of their poaching runs. But they're way too far ahead of us. And besides, if the snow keeps up, the tracks will be completely covered up by morning. No, we'll push on into Dixon and Lavier tomorrow like we originally planned. With any luck, we'll get to meet Sawyer and Linton some other time in the next couple of months. I'm betting they've got 50 traps cached up at Prue Lake. And this time, I'm going to find them.
Well, I hope so. It's just that searching for the break in a phone line over at Dixon and Lavier doesn't sound all that exciting to me.
Oh, so it's exciting you want. Have you forgotten Mr. Bartlett's orders? He said fix the phone lines first, and that's what Mr. Bartlett will be getting. What did you have in mind moving up to the superintendent's job after just 1 month on the job, Bert? Besides, I think you might find it well worth your while over at Lavier. Last year, me and Jim got 22 wolves just between here and Crow Bay. Not bad for just 150 snares. 22 fewer of those bloody deer-killing vermin, and $220 extra in our pockets. Pay attention to me, lad, and we might do just as well this year, too. Anyhow, we got our work cut out for us tomorrow without trying to catch up with a couple of no-good poachers who are already home by now. Time for you and me both to turn in.
That last exhibit was the ranger's cabin. This one is the fireman's exhibit.
Chief Ranger's office. Jack here.
Yeah, it's Bell at Crow Lake Tower. I have a smoke at 43 degrees, approximately 10 miles medium column, black, and she's coming up pretty good. Could be from that lightning storm last week. You got a sighting yet from Booth Lake Tower?
Yeah, we do, Bill. Booth Lake got 337 and a half. So your lines of sight cross about the north end of Thrush Lake. Keep a close lookout on that one, Bill. Sounds like that could really take off.
Yes, I'll watch her. Report in again in about 10 minutes. Well, I've got you on the line, Jack. Maybe I could give you my food order for next Wednesday's flight.
Sure, go ahead, Bill.
Okay, I need 3 pounds of carrots, 10 pounds of potatoes, a mixed case of canned peas, beans, and beets.
I got that.
Dozen oranges, 6 tins of click, 6 tins of Spam.
Okay.
5 pounds of salt pork, 3 pounds of slab bacon, and make sure they don't slice it.
Okay.
Half a dozen cans of carnation milk, a dozen eggs, 2 pounds of butter, 6 loaves of bread.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, 2 pounds of tea.
Okay, Bill, I got all that. Anything else?
No, that's it for food. I've had some interesting visitors, though. This morning I had 2 wolves right below the tower, and yesterday I had 6 canoe trippers climb up for a visit. Real nice people. Invited me to come and visit them when I come out of the bush in 3 months. A place called Rochester? It's someplace in the States.
Oops, okay, Bill. Sorry to cut you off, but I got to get some men on that fire. You can tell me about your social life some other time.
Sure, Jack. I'll call you back in 10 minutes, like we said.